So Lori, I wanted to thank you for agreeing to give a seminar on such short notice, and introduce you to Lou Lefton and Shawi Abdullah, who are both at Georgia Tech in the research office there. And they actually found your work and notified me about it. And I said, well, let me see if I can get her to come and speak with you about it. So I suspect that Lou and Shawi may have numerous questions for you. So real quick, this is just a seminar that we have about studying higher education as a system. And we meet weekly, and we have graduate students here who this is their research topic. And then I'm going to let Lou and Shawi introduce themselves.
Yeah, so I'm Shawi Abdullah. I'm actually at home right now, but I'm the Executive Vice President for Research at Georgia Tech. Prior to that, I worked with Greg at the University of New Mexico.
Lou, I think you might be driving, so.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Go ahead.
I'm Lou Lefton. I'm a faculty member in math at Georgia Tech. Shawi is my boss. I'm Associate Vice President for Research Computing. And I've spoken to Nirav and Iqbal on the KMap project several times, and it's really great work, and I'm just excited that you're here to share your thoughts.
And Lori, I'll let you introduce yourself because
Sure. I'm Lori Schultz. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Research Intelligence here at the U of A. So after a long career in research administration, what I'm doing now has more to do with things like research on research, all of these systems like KMap, like Elsevier Pure, that the systems we use to figure out who people are and what they're doing in research is really what my job is now. That and figuring out how we use these tools to bring teams together for collaborative proposals and all of those sort of associated things.
Sounds perfect. Sounds like the perfect.
It's a fun job. There's no shortage of fun things to do.
Yeah, we just hired the chair of public policy. Her name is Cassidy Sugimoto, that's her area. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. She was at Indiana University, but she does basically science of science, research on research, all of that stuff. So yeah.
Drew, you want to quickly introduce yourself? Lori is a faculty here at U of A who's going to give the talk today.
Hi, Lori. I'm Drew Koch. I'm with the Gardner Institute, not-for-profit organization that very much so interested in and working with to improve teaching, learning, and post-secondary education. And that's the first line of the mission statement, and the second has to do all about because we believe doing so advances equity and social justice. Known Greg and Shawi for almost a decade now. They've been kind enough to allow me to get into good trouble with them. So it's good to be with you now.
Great, thanks.
And I just want to say, Lori is doing this on very short notice, so I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Lori.
Great. So I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen and talk a little bit about what KMap is. So KMap started life. Can you guys see that okay?
Yep.
So you can visit KMap. You do not have to have a U of A login to play around in it. It's at kmap.arizona.edu. Having a login just lets you have a little control over your own personal record to make sure things are showing up the way they ought to be. So what the institutional knowledge map is it started out as a project that our computer science department proposed to the then senior vice president for research at the time, knowing that we didn't have a way to identify on our campus who was working together, what expertise was out there. I mean, when we knew the answers to those questions that had more to do with personal experience and anecdotal evidence, not actual pulling in of data around publications and other research outputs or, proposals, grants and contracts. And we weren't using that information to make those discoveries. It was more like, oh, we know Dr. So-and-so is big in liver disease. And we just sort of know that because we know that, not because we have any systematic way of doing it. And we didn't have a way of seeing how our faculty, departments, and colleges work together. That information exists in a lot of different ways. If we've got proposals and awards and we've got PIs and co-PIs that cross departments and college, we can see that information in our grant system, but we can't see it in a way that makes it make sense, to be perfectly honest. I can get a download of an Excel spreadsheet and I can do things there, but what Knowledge Map does is present a visual way of all the things I'm talking about. Finding experts, finding out who works together, what it does is uses data that we already have. So I talk about grants and contracts. Our enterprise systems for entering and submitting proposals, and our enterprise system for recording grants and contracts that are received to sponsor projects are all part of the KMap data sources, as well as UAVTA, which is our campus system for profiles, and in some units is used for promotion and tenure. So there's a lot of information in UAVTA that's managed by individual faculty and their departments. It is a little bit variable there in terms of who uses it and who's required to use it. We also use the ORCID API to bring in data.
Yeah.
Good. So I will go ahead and walk through a couple of examples. When you go to kmap.arizona.edu, you will see all these tabs that sort of give you an idea of what we're doing here. And the KMap tutorial page links to a bunch of YouTube videos we've made to show people how to use it. I mean, with Greg learning about my involvement in this, I mean, one of the biggest problems we have to solve is people knowing it exists and using it to see if their information is correct and to find other people. But I'll go ahead and click on the map, and I'll just, what it really does, the departments listed here in the map are University of Arizona departments. All University of Arizona employees are represented somewhere in the map, but the people that will appear when I start doing the search are people that have output related to whatever I'm searching for. That could be a publication, citation, it could be a grant, it could be a proposal, not necessarily an awarded one, but it could be a proposal. And then it'll show how there is any interrelatedness if there are people working together on these topics. So I'm going to go ahead and just put something in there. And for those of you who have talked to Iqbal and Nirav, Iqbal was the postdoc who primarily developed KMap. He is a data scientist and did a lot of this work. It really is about natural language processing. So it will find things that are common related search indicators, not just the term that I look for. So if I start typing in a word, it brings up topics that it'll know it'll find. It also starts to bring up grants to look for things if I wanted to look for grants specifically. But if I click on fiber optics, it's going to bring up who's doing it and who's on top is where the search result happens more frequently. And it's going to bring in related topics to the search term I used. But what I can kind of do is zoom in and figure out what's happening with these folks. I can click on a professor, and then I'm going to see a bunch of different ways that this professor is working with other people inside the U of A and inside his own department. And the thickness of the line is indicative of how often those interactions are happening. And so, if you click on a line, you can see like these are actual proposals. The green ones are funding, and the gray ones, gray is proposal, red is citation, and green is funding, where these folks were working together. If I zoom out a little bit, you can see where he is now in the College of Optical Sciences and where across campus his reach is, into physics, into Bio 5, which is a biomedical institute we have here, into physiology and medicine. I can also narrow down the search by clicking on one of these other buttons, like green is for grants, and I can go back in time on grants, like shorten my amount of time or lengthen my amount of time to see how that has changed. The other two options are citations and then H-index. But if I go back to Dr. Q, I can basically see who he's working with and figure out what his network is at the U of A based on this topic. If I click on one of these things and I look at there was a proposal with Dr. Q and Dr. Sandhu, or there was publications with Dr. Barton and Dr. Q, and dig into those things a little bit more, as well as on the left, see the grants where he is listed as PI or co-PI. Are there any questions as I keep talking?
Yeah, so this is all at U of A, right? You know, the data is U of A faculty and researchers, right?
That's correct. Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, but you're using ORCID, you said, right? You're using the ORCID API?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
Is
and that's
everybody-
relatively new addition.
Right, so is everybody, so if somebody is not on ORCID, it's not part of your system, or they can enter it themselves?
They can enter it themselves, or they would be part of our system if they're a U of A employee,
Yeah.
if they have citations or proposals
Yeah.
for sponsored
Right.
project.
Right, but
You-
you know, go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was gonna have a follow-up to that.
Yeah. What, I guess my question is, you know, this is one of the things is that, you know, the data, so it could be like in my name, you know, it could be under ORCID, it could be Shawi Abdallah, and under, you know, some papers, it could be CT Abdallah, and some other place, it could be something else. So how do you
That's
do?
your fault. That's your fault, man.
No, you know,
Okay,
I've
go.
used, yeah, anyway, yeah, so
Okay.
how do you do, how do you
No,
do?
I know that happens. Well, I always tell my students, be consistent.
Yeah,
Yeah,
But-
and that is a good question. I mean, one of the sources that I failed to mention was Google Scholar, of course.
Yeah.
So we're doing some disambiguation there,
yeah, okay,
comparing across the different sources in ORCID. And ORCID is a relatively new addition. We only started the API in the past few months.
yeah, okay.
Do you
Okay.
have a faculty profile system like Vivo or some other homegrown thing?
Yeah, we call it UA Vitae, and that information is brought in here. But and I don't know if Greg, if you wanted giving a U of A faculty member's perspective on the use of UA Vitae, it is not consistent across colleges.
Yeah,
You know, I haven't used it yet, so I probably need to, but I know, Andrea Romero is always talking about how she's trying to get faculty to put it in there so that it can be used for tenure promotion. So I do think that they're really pushing to get faculty to use that.
well, I mean, the way to do it, you know, I you know, Greg, you and I understand how hard it is to get faculty to do something, but the way to do it is maybe if it's to pull some of the information or fill it in and then have them correct it, right?
Yeah, yep. But I'm gonna get in there, Lori. I need to do it.
Well, if we search for you, let's see what we find.
Yeah, let's see.
HEILEMAN.
There he
you go.
is.
There we see you. And see, you know, this is another thing that we obviously need to solve. Since Greg has both an academic appointment and an administrative appointment, he's showing up in both places. So he's showing up in the provost's office, and then also
Greg looks like an island.
it's because the
Well,
provost's
I don't
office is
think
an island.
there's too many. I don't think there's too many other people in administration who are writing grants at the moment. Maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe.
But where
that's how
do those go?
Yeah, and so so the island is actually the administrative unit. So in this case,
Yes.
it would be academic affairs under the provost office, and that's what the island is. But then if we zoom in on who you're working with, let's go over here.
Greg, I think that's called the Island of Misfit Toys.
Have
Yeah.
fun, guys.
And so we've got Marla Franco in our HSI office.
Okay.
And where else have we got?
And Lori, you shared this earlier, and I may have missed it. I arrived, I was tardy. This is within U of A right now.
Yes.
And is the intent to only utilize it? I mean, it's a big enough domain, don't get me wrong, but within U of A, or is there potential for a? I'm looking at this and saying, okay, we're working with faculty who are doing research on course and curriculum redesign across institutions, right? And I may be jumping way ahead here, so if I am, stop me, right? Keep me within the lane.
Yeah, no worries. We really do want it to be more than just inside the U of A. I mean, it's so, you know, I'm not a developer. I'm the person who is giving them a bunch of ideas about feeding the Oracle is kind of the way I look at it, is what are other ways that we can make this system useful. And so there are a bunch of different things that we're working on. And, you know, aside from bringing in the data that we know already exists from either sources we own or sources that are open to us to use, like Google Scholar. We're looking at bringing in other data like travel, because we have a travel registry, most institutions do. So if I searched for a country, I would find people who had some connection with that country, like they are doing the research in some area in that country, but it wouldn't necessarily tell me another layer of that data, which is who travels there. But we have that data, so why don't we use it? And then we're, you know, thinking about how do we overlay other institutional sources, but then how do we look outside of this information and add data sources to compare ourselves across other institutions or find collaborators with other institutions. I mean, the issue there is like, are we really trying to replicate academic analytics or be better?
Right. So
or, you know.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. Is that there are commercial products that do that. You know, Greg knows how I feel about it. Well, we both feel about commercial products, but I think there are things like that, you know, basically they scrape the data that's available and then they sell it back to us, you know, for a lot more. And I think that's the problem, is that so if U of A, because we're doing something similar, you know, maybe Lou can explain also what we're trying to do. And, you know, University of Florida did something. Everybody is doing something similar like this. It would be nice to try to either come up with standards or something that we can use each other's somehow, you know, so each other's data and so on. So,
Yeah, and you know, one of the things about KMap that I'm happy to say is that we will share with anyone. And if there is appetite to work together on how do we make it better for all of us, and we're sort of, like you say, using the same standards on the same page with defining what we're doing, we can make something really great. I think that it can answer some of the questions that we have that we're trying to solve in a much more manual way, like since you are in a very compliance role at the university, things like foreign influence. Like how can we find things that are out there that someone is literally doing a Google search about?
That's right.
So Lori, I know that this was done on short notice, but I also want to make sure you have plenty of time to share any other demos or slides or things that you wanted to give us. But this is great stuff. I know that I think in some ways, to Drew's question, and we've actually started to do this across multiple institutions in a very rudimentary way, with the focus on HBCUs and MSIs, tribal colleges, Hispanic serving institutions, et cetera. And we just this summer built out some data graphs around Georgia Tech collaborations with other institutions. And it's really about taking the data, which tends to be non-people centric. It's here's a list of grants, it's grant centric, or here's a list of expenditures, it's finance centric, or here's a list of spaces. But what we're trying to, and all people are connected into those. So what we're trying to do is flip that graph, put people at the center, and also then build edges between individuals. So if I know that Shawi Abdullah published a paper in a particular journal and his co-author is Greg Hallman, then I can put a link between them that says collaborates with. And if I know that Shawi published a paper on signal processing and Bill Gates published a paper on signal processing because Web of Science also has keyword information, then I can put that Shawi and Bill Gates have a shared interest link, and I can put a property on that edge that says signal processing. So now I can search for signal processing. I go, oh, here's two people. I know they have a shared interest because they both published a paper with that same keyword. So that adding of data, which is around topics and people, is really sort of secondary data that you can infer from the graph. And that's really powerful. We're using Web of Science, which doesn't require a faculty profile system because it's the full citation index. So it captures every paper that's been cited by every other paper, and therefore you don't have all disciplines covered. There are gaps in some humanities and other social sciences, but it's a very good start. We're also working with our K Husbands Feeling and public policy to get other data sources and other ways of measuring collaboration. So yes to grants, yes to proposals, yes to co-authorships. And we're also doing commercialization. If you submitted a technology license disclosure or a patent, that's another layer of collaboration. So this is a way of actually measuring. If you want to say, we want to increase interdisciplinary collaboration, we can actually now say over these, if this graph developed, we could see thicker and thicker edges.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, it's really the challenge is really interesting to sort of figure out how to display and find these networks. And like you say, infer from the things that are already there, the things that we don't have access to. And that is definitely what we're trying to crack. I want to show you two other things. And then obviously any questions you guys have. Inside this, we have the ability to also add big chunks of text like an abstract for it to search on concepts that are inside the abstract. So I'm just using a chunk of text that I've been using to find people. And this is just another way of looking at the same thing. Again, all U of A finds people who are covered by the text that I put in there, and if those folks work together and what colleges they're in at the U of A, and then we have it listed here by what their title and rank is. And then there's one other thing that is maybe my favorite thing about this that I really want to spend more time on, at least pushing out so that people know it's there, and that's future research. I mean, one of the things that that all of us have problems with here is that it counts something that already happened. Because there was a thing that enumerated whatever it was that happened, whether that was a grant or a publication or whatever, is our ability to add in future areas of inquiry. There may not be things yet, but there could be. And so any person with a login can add this information to show about what, you know, their future areas of inquiry are.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
Really
so,
cool.
So what's the engine? What, you know, like in our case, for example, Lou, maybe you can describe, you know, what we're doing, you know, how we're doing it, but what is the technology, both the science, but also the tools? What are you using?
Yeah, the type of database that is behind this, I think Lou, I know, is working with graph databases, but also the visualization. What visualization framework are you using? I'm curious. Do you know?
You know, since I'm not the technical person, I can follow up on those answers, but I'm going to take you to the publications page on KMap that has a lot of information about how this was developed and by whom. Yeah. Okay,
we'll look into it.
Iqbal and I have talked about this at some length, and in fact, I just had an email with him today where he shared the topic taxonomy and schema that he's been using, which is really very, very valuable because they did a lot of work in curating that. But we've been using Neo4j, which is sort of a leading graph database engine. Iqbal's been using a dot format, which is more of a low-level graph representation. It's still a graph database. Fundamentally, a graph database looks different than SQL, right? It's edges and nodes, and you have labels on the nodes and labels.
I'm sorry. Did you say KMap is using that?
KMap is using a graph database. It is not using Neo4j. He can move his data in and out of Neo4j but he's using a lower level data representation that's based on the GraphViz, the graph description language, DOT. DOT is a graph description language that's a sort of a low level graph. And so he's using that as the representation, if you will. But to go between that and Neo4j is simple coding. Neo4j is more of a viz layer, and it has some of the nice kind of eye candy and interaction that you see here, but it also has some of the built-in sort of guessing and analytics as well. So I think they're both similar in the technology space.
I think, Lou, you can do more with relationships, I think, within Neo4j, can't you? Isn't it more about you can specify things about the edges in the graph a little bit better.
Yeah, and the thing about Neo4j is it's got a huge, it's got a lot of mind share and a big developer community, kind of like what Python and Julia and R have. And so as a Viz layer, you just have more eyes on the ball.
Interesting. Wow, this is really cool.
Yeah, and in terms
So-
of, I mentioned talking about travel, but one of the other things we're looking at adding is, so this does bring in all U of A employees, whether they're researchers or not. So I'm in there, but I don't have any publications. So I can search for my name and it'll pop up on the map, but it doesn't really have any meaning. And the same could be true for research staff who are early in their career or aren't yet publications. So one of the things we're working to do is with our HR unit is figure out how do we include skill sets from job postings and what people have that are in those jobs that we could say, okay, research specialist X in optical sciences has these skills because of the job they're in, has these requirements. And we're still working through that because part of it is what can we get because the job requirements are known in our job families, and what can we not get because we don't have applicant permission to put that into our system.
So one of the things we're trying to do is to try to link also our researchers to other data. So not just the proposals, so on, but to the space, the physical space, labs, and other things we know about that research project, to their coursework, to what they're teaching and so on. So ultimately, I think having these both the tools, the data, the data, but also the visualization is going to help us to try to make a lot better decisions, or better informed decisions, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, our roadmap is like, this is an idea that just never dies. Like, you can always add stuff to it.
Yeah.
There are others on campus who are working with GIS on campus space, and we do want to figure out how to put those two pieces together. We just haven't gotten there yet. Yeah.
Lori, when did this work? Oh, go ahead, Lou, sorry.
I just had an operational question. I know that Nirav is a faculty member in computer science, and we actually had a meeting with him and John Stasko and Cleo Andrus, who were some visualization folks, to see if we could maybe spark something there, but it didn't work. And I know Iqbal's a research scientist what's your team? How's this operationalized? Is it a 2, 3, 4, 5? How does it work?
It is a growing team. So Iqbal has some part-time resources that actually belong to Nirav. We literally just got permission to hire 2 new developers. So we will be doing that. The job posting is actually out there. And so it's really still a small team. Iqbal and what will be a couple of full-time developers. And we've got an operations committee that's made up of some stakeholders to kind of drive the roadmap priorities.
So Iqbal's the PhD director, more or less, of KMap now, or are still other faculty involved?
He's really the one, and the other faculty involved are on the operations committee, which includes faculty from computer science and our College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, because they're maybe our heaviest users.
Is Iqbal a faculty or staff?
He's staff.
But he's a research scientist.
He's a research scientist, yeah.
In your office, in the Office of Institutional Research?
Yes.
Good share. Interesting.
Yeah, he was a
Lori,
postdoc and we wanted to keep him.
When did the work on this start? What's the history?
This started when Dr. Espy, our previous senior vice president for research, was here. We got the request from a professor in computer science who had the idea and wanted to create a project out of it. So it started in about 2015.
2015, okay.
As a project for his postdoc, who is Iqbal. Yeah.
I got you. So it's been going for 6 or so years. Okay.
Yeah.
So Lori, go ahead, Greg.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go, Drew.
This may be a bit pedantic, but as I look at this, right, and I can get back to my previous point, and there's a question coming, I swear. We've probably worked with faculty and academic administrators at over 90 institutions on course redesign. And they tend to concentrate in specific courses and specific disciplines, right? And I mentioned that in many instances, they're doing research and or asking who else is doing research, right? So I'm bringing that up as the background context, but part of this is if we were to use KMap to help map or demonstrate that across institutional boundaries, what type of labor implications does that have on you, right? Because here we are, and I'm getting egocentric fast, but an external entity going in using KMap, and you were just talking about how you got permission to hire, but you can get permission to hire to map the course redesign ecosystem according to the Gardner Institute. You got permission to hire to do this work, right? So I'm asking simply if this does get used more so broadly to answer some questions in a broader higher ed ecosystem, what sort of implications does that have on you?
Yeah, and I think that Iqbal could probably answer this better than I could about what the actual workload is for him. I think that where we are with getting permission to hire, having new resources that will be available to us, and maintaining those research is a straight up ROI calculation. Like we're doing the work, what benefit we're getting out of it? Are we going for bigger team proposals that we haven't gone for before?
Yeah,
Are we discovering data that makes us make decisions that we wouldn't have made before? So part of it is really that calculation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I bring it up, Laura, I'll give an example. As we talk with funders and they're looking at our work, and sometimes they're funding work with 6 institutions, sometimes we're working with a whole state or system. There's probably an opportunity then for us to think through how we could use something along these lines to create much more potential connection.
The work that Lou mentioned, I mean, we focused on, the HBCUs that we work with in here, but that's what we're trying to do within this ecosystem. But, I think, as I mentioned, or as you said, I mean, you have commercial providers who can pull the same information or can pull it across institutes, except, again, it costs you 150, 200,000 a year for, forever, basically. A lot of people cannot afford it. More importantly, I think this is the stuff that we do. I mean, here's U of A doing it, we're on. And I think if we just do it in a way that can provide the tools to, especially to people like the universities you work with, Drew, right? I mean, a lot of the folks you work with, a lot of the colleges, they can't afford the whole thing. And this
they can't do this. Yeah.
Opportunity. There's an opportunity. They're going to get a lot of money right now. A lot of money that come to underrepresented, MSIs and so on.
Yep.
And as they're trying to build up both their research infrastructure, to know who they can collaborate with if they don't already collaborate. Because I know in our case we do have a lot of collaborations, except frankly we didn't know who everybody is doing, except just ask like we started the conversation. So
Yeah, I mean, the logical
point,
next step.
Go ahead, Greg.
Logical
I'm
next
sorry.
step that you're all kind of is to extend this beyond the boundaries of the institution. And I agree, Sherry, with what you're saying. I mean, the value that academic analytics brings is that they spend a lot of time to understand like who is where at a current point in time, right? I remember them telling me that they spent a lot of time trying to figure out, what faculty are actually currently at an institution and trying to really understand that. But they're accessing all public data sources too.
That's right.
Right?
So, yeah.
So,
that's right. Yeah. And then they can project things. I mean, really, ultimately what they're saying right now, initially, Greg, remember when we looked at them and, our faculty at UNM, went up in arms and so on. So they pivoted to say, we're really not trying to evaluate people and so on. Really, in our case, for example, we used to have it and we stopped using it because only like 10, 15 people on campus were using it. We're paying a lot of money and not, but I'll tell you one use case that I'm familiar with is when somebody gets an offer from somewhere else you know, we go into academic analytics and we remove that person from his unit, and would see the impact that would have on funding, on publications, on citations, on rankings. That's what we, which is, you know, I mean, that's good. You know, that's information we need to have.
Yeah, and we've talked about the operation committee that is sort of the steering group for KMap has talked about exactly that scenario. Like, how do we plan for when people go for whatever reason they go? And then how do we introduce competitive intelligence, you know, concepts to this? Yeah.
That, you know, academic analytics has that where they don't tell you the person most likely to be recruited from your
That's what I'm saying. That's,
yeah.
But
which
I
is
mean,
pretty interesting. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but the information is in the data. I mean, once we have, so they're getting the data from publicly available sources. They're scraping the data, and then they're doing exactly the things that we can do. You know,
it's cleaning. I mean, they're getting the data cleaned up in a way that makes it usable. You're right. There's no reason that if we could figure out the right framework to do that collaboratively.
Their value add is mostly around three things. It's UI UX. They have much better graphics, and they have much easier fewer barriers to entry for people to play around with it. They also do a lot of cleaning and linkage, and so that's just heavy data science lift that anybody could do. It's because the data in the world is messy, and then they do some analytics, but their analytics is limited. Mostly 2-year-old data. I think the real advantage, and this is one of the things Cassidy Sugimoto, who Shawi mentioned, and I are going to be looking at some funding opportunities. And you know, frankly, I think in partnering with UA and maybe even Gartner on this, I think the idea would be, let's figure out the right schema that could turn this into an get your internal data to look like this. Then we provide an open source project to merge it with external data. And when you use just internal data like KMap is using, you get some insights. When you use just external data like academic analytics or stuff does, you get different insights. When you put your internal data, you have your customized data system that uses both internal and external. And now you have, and there's a community around it that develops value. Then you have something that works for you and your university, and that you can then continue to extend without having to pay as much. I think there's value in that model, and that's I think there's honestly funding that could be leveraged to put something. But this is just, we're still in the preliminary stages, and I think Arizona and Georgia Tech have a real affinity, or you know, some real synergy in this area right now.
Well said, Lou.
Well, and as Shawi shared earlier, there are huge science implications in all of this. But you know, if we're looking for some specific demonstration projects that advance some work around undergraduate education, we certainly would love to be a part of that, right? So
there is. So let me tell you something on that. So there are a lot of well, first of all, to get students involved with this, undergraduates is obvious. You can do that. But also a lot of research right now, a lot of things around research has to do with not just undergraduate research, but preparing undergraduates from underrepresented minorities to continue their research elsewhere. So I think there's this I guess opportunity to try to not just engage them, but to find them. I mean, there are a lot of interesting things, you know, that right now, if you had the information about, okay, this is something, let's say you're working in cybersecurity, somebody's interested in cybersecurity, they can locate some of this stuff. It could be also opportunities for funding at the University of Arizona or whatever, and so on. So there is an undergraduate, there's a really interesting one. When we were in New Mexico, Greg created also this other thing where you have basically a matching program, you know, a matching program where people will enter what they're interested in, faculty, whether it's funded or not, you know, what type of students, what type of skills, and so on. And the students will also do the same, you know, they will advertise themselves, and we have a matching. this could be that you can use the tools here to do matching across
Yeah.
institutions.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can
we-
see that
the
being
matching-
student. Go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say the matching I saw here, Lori, is between faculty, but the one that we built was trying to get students and faculty to sync up.
Yeah.
And for faculty to say, these are the needs I have on this particular project, if you have these skills, and then the student could do the same, and then we would try to put the two in contact with one another. That would be a fun thing to add to this.
Yeah, for sure. I took a note on that because I think that would be really useful. I mean, so much of what we try to do is to make sure undergrads have a well-rounded experience, which has to include research, but I'm biased.
I could get that system that we built. I think I could get the student who did it is a PhD student of mine now. I think
Oh,
he
who
would
did
share
it?
that.
Who did it?
Michael Darling.
But
So
he's
I
gone,
think
right?
yeah, but he stays in touch. I can get in touch with him.
Oh,
and
cool.
see if
Yeah,
we
yeah.
could use-
Can we get it? Yeah, can we get it too?
Yeah,
Greg?
I'll make a note to try and get
Yeah.
that from him.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
there's that student to faculty. There's even the student to student connection on this
Right.
potentially as well, right?
Yeah.
And I say it, there's Aaron Brower out of Wisconsin, a sociologist. I mean, he did this work in the 90s around life cycles of students in undergraduate education. And he didn't coin the phrases, but he used the phrases about prototype matching and future selving, how students are seeing
Mhm.
other peers, you know, and I could see there being, particularly when you're dealing with a dynamic where you are one of X in your institution, but even seeing that there are other students like you. I mean, there are some serious learning mindset components and all this too, associated with belonging and purpose and relevance. So there are a ton of possibilities here.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, I think I will stop the recording if that's okay at this point, folks, and then
Yeah.